Warhammer 40,000 is filled with countless horrors, each unique in their methods of spreading destruction across the stars. But when you take one of the most brutal, simplistic races in the galaxy and give them access to one of the most sophisticated, warp-corrupted weapons of war, you create a scenario that defies easy prediction. Today, we're exploring one of the most fascinating and horrifying what-if scenarios in the Warhammer 40k universe. What happens when orcs capture a sorcerer dreadnought? This is not a simple question of one army looting another's equipment. This is a fundamental clash between two entirely different realities. On one side, you have the orcs, a race whose technology functions through sheer collective belief and whose psychic gestalt field makes the impossible possible. On the other, you have a chaos dreadnought piloted by a corrupted psyker, a walking tomb that houses both a tortured sorcerer and often a bound demon, all wrapped in armor covered with blasphemous runes and warp-tainted technology. When these two forces meet, when greenskin ingenuity collides with demonic possession, the results are as unpredictable as they are catastrophic. To understand what happens in this scenario, we need to examine multiple layers of complexity. We must understand the orcs and their unique relationship with technology, the nature of chaos dreadnoughts, and what makes sorcerer variants particularly dangerous, and the fundamental incompatibility between the Waegaj psychic field and the corruption of chaos. Only by understanding all these elements can we truly grasp the horror, the comedy, and the absolute devastation that unfolds when an orc mechboy gets his hands on a demon-possessed war machine, piloted by a 10,000-year-old sorcerer. The stage is set for disaster on a scale that only Warhammer 40k can provide. Let us begin. Understanding orc technology and looting culture. Before we can understand what happens when orcs capture a sorcerer dreadnought, we must first understand the greenskins themselves and their utterly unique relationship with technology. The orcs are one of the most successful species in the galaxy, not because of sophistication or planning, but because of their sheer adaptability and their genetic programming as weapons of war. The orcs were created millions of years ago by the ancient race known as the Old Ones, engineered as biological weapons during the war in heaven. What makes them so successful is not just their physical prowess or their love of combat, but the fact that every orc carries within their genetic code the accumulated knowledge of their entire species. This manifests most clearly in the odd boys, specialized orcs, who are born with instinctive knowledge of specific tasks. Among these, the mech boys are perhaps the most important to orc society, as we know it. Mech boys are not engineers in any conventional sense. They do not study, they do not learn through trial and error in the way other races might. Instead, they simply know how to build things. This knowledge is encoded in their DNA, passed down from the brain boys who originally created the orc species. A mech boy will look at a pile of scrap metal and instinctively understand how it can become a functional weapon or vehicle. They work by feel, by intuition, hammering and welding and bolting pieces together until they have created something that, by all rights, should not work at all. And here is where things get truly strange. Orc technology is famously unreliable when handled by other races. Imperial forces who have captured orc weapons often find them to be crude, poorly assembled, and in some cases, physically impossible. A shooter might be little more than a metal tube with a trigger mechanism that has no clear path for the ammunition to travel. A truck might have an engine that is missing critical components, or wheels that are not properly attached to any drivetrain. By all logic, by all physical laws, these things should not function, yet they do. And they function because of the way is one of the most important concepts in understanding orc society and technology. It operates on three levels simultaneously. First, it is the massive military campaigns that orcs undertake when enough of them gather under a powerful war boss. Second, it is the collective psychic field that all orcs generate simply by existing in proximity to one another. Third, it is the reality warping effect that this psychic field creates. This third aspect is crucial to understanding orc technology. The Wei Jish field does not simply make orcs stronger or more aggressive, though it does do both of those things. It actually alters reality itself to match orc expectations. If enough orcs believe that red vehicles go faster, then red vehicles do go faster. If orcs believe that a particular gun should work, then it works, regardless of whether its construction actually makes any sense. The Adeptus Mechanicus has studied this phenomenon extensively, and their findings are both fascinating and deeply disturbing to their religious sensibilities. During the War of the Beast, tech priests observed that orc weapons would only function when held by orcs themselves. When a human tried to fire a looted orc weapon, it would often fail to operate entirely. The same weapon, in the hands of an orc, would function perfectly. This suggests that the Wei field provides something that other races would call a machine spirit, a psychic animating force that makes the physically impossible into functional reality. This brings us to the orc practice of looting. Orcs are natural scavengers and looters. In fact, looting is so ingrained in orc culture that there is an entire specialized caste dedicated to it. The looters are orcs who follow the battlefield like vultures, stripping anything valuable from the wreckage of battle. They prize enemy weapons and vehicles above all else, seeing them as proof of their victories and as useful components for future projects. The process of looting is not subtle. When orcs find a functional enemy vehicle, they do not carefully disassemble it to understand its function. They tear it apart with their bare hands, ripping out anything that looks valuable or interesting. Weapons are pulled from their mounts, armor plates are torn free, and internal components are extracted without any regard for how they might be connected to other systems. To an observer from the Imperium or any other organized faction, this appears to be mindless vandalism, and in many ways, it is. But then the looted components make their way to the mech boys, and something remarkable happens. The mech boy will look at this pile of disconnected, damaged components and immediately begin to see possibilities. That Imperial battle cannon could be mounted on a truck. That targeting system could be welded to a big shooter. That armor plating could be bolted onto a deft dread. The mech boy does not need to understand how these components were originally designed to function. They simply know, instinctively, how to make them work in new and horrifying ways. The results of orc looting are vehicles and weapons that are simultaneously terrifying and absurd. A looted Lehman Russ tank might have had all of its original weapons replaced with orc equivalents, its armor reinforced with mismatched plates bolted on at random angles, and its engine improved with modifications that would make any tech priest weep with rage. The inside might be barely large enough for an orc crew to squeeze into. The controls might be simplified to the point of being dangerous, and the entire vehicle might be painted in garish colors that serve no tactical purpose whatsoever. And yet it works. It works because the orcs believe it works. The Wei field fills in the gaps, makes the impossible connections, provides the missing components through sheer psychic will. The tank might be slower and less accurate than its Imperial counterpart, but it is also bigger, louder, and more likely to explode in a satisfying manner when it finally does break down. Looted vehicles are particularly prized by the Death Skulls clan, who have elevated the practice to an art form. Death Skulls orcs can often loot a vehicle, repair it with scavenged parts, and then use it in battle during the same campaign from which they stole it. This requires an impressive level of both audacity and mechanical intuition, even by orc standards. The Death Skulls paint everything they own blue because they believe blue is the luckiest color, and their belief makes it so. The scale of orc looting can be truly staggering. There are legends among the Imperium of an orc looter called Grabber Gutsbag, who supposedly looted Imperial Titans. Titans are walking cathedrals of war, some standing over 100 feet tall and mounting weapons capable of leveling cities. The idea that an orc could not only capture one of these god machines but make it work is almost too horrifying to contemplate. Yet, in the Warhammer 40k universe, with the power of the WAG behind them, even this becomes possible. But looting is not just about vehicles and weapons. Orcs will loot anything they find useful or interesting. Armor, tools, ammunition, even bits of decorative trim if it is shiny enough. Everything gets torn apart, hammered into new shapes, and incorporated into the growing mass of orc technology. The more successful a WIGH becomes, the more sophisticated its arsenal becomes, not through innovation, but through endless iteration and modification of captured equipment. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As orcs win battles, they capture more equipment. More equipment means more raw materials for the mech boys. More modifications mean more unique and powerful weapons. More powerful weapons mean more victories. And all the while, the WAG field grows stronger with each success, with each orc who hears of the fighting and joins the horde, until you have a force that can threaten entire sectors of space. It is into this culture of crude ingenuity, violent modification, and reality-warping belief that we must imagine a Chaos Sorcerer dreadnought falling. The orcs do not understand what they have found. They do not comprehend the dangers of chaos corruption or the complex rituals that bind demons into metal shells. They see only a really big, really tough fighting machine that probably has some excellent gubbins inside. And with that simple observation, they set in motion a chain of events that will test the very limits of what the WAG field can accomplish. The nature of chaos, dreadnoughts, and hellbrutes. To understand the catastrophe that unfolds when orcs attempt to loot a sorcerer dreadnought, we must first understand exactly what a chaos dreadnought is, and more importantly, what it is not. These walking tombs of rage and madness represent one of the most tragic fates that can befall a Chaos Space Marine, a punishment that makes death seem like mercy. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the traitor legions possessed dreadnought technology identical to that of their loyalist brothers. When a Space Marine was mortally wounded but still valuable to their legion, they could be interred within a dreadnought sarcophagus, their broken bodies sealed within a walking war machine that would allow them to continue fighting for millennia. For the loyalist Space Marines, this is considered a great honor, a chance to serve the Emperor even beyond death. The ancient warriors who pilot these machines are revered as heroes, their wisdom sought out, and their presence on the battlefield seen as a blessing. For Chaos Space Marines, the experience could not be more different. After the Horus Heresy, when the traitor, legions fled into the Eye of Terror and other warp-corrupted regions of space, the knowledge required to properly construct and maintain dreadnoughts began to fade. The rituals of care, the technology of stasis that might have allowed entombed warriors to sleep peacefully between battles, the medical expertise required to keep a brain alive within a sarcophagus for thousands of years, all of this was lost or deliberately discarded. Worse, the very nature of chaos began to warp and corrupt the dreadnoughts themselves. This corruption gave birth to what are now known as hellbrutes, the most common form of chaos dreadnought. A hellbrute is not just a machine with a pilot. It is a fusion of metal and demonic flesh, a thing that defies the normal laws of reality. The warrior inside the sarcophagus does not sleep between battles. Instead, their sarcophagus is disconnected from the hellbrute's body and hung in special chambers, surrounded by warding runes that barely contain the demons that claw at the imprisoned marine from the other side of reality. The marine inside is not at peace. They are awake, aware, and suffering. They have been awake for centuries, perhaps millennia, with nothing but their own thoughts and the whispers of chaos for company. The body that was once theirs has long since fused with the interior of the sarcophagus, flesh melding with metal until the two are inseparable. The pain is constant. The madness is inevitable. When the Hellbrute is activated and reconnected to its mechanical body, the marine inside is given brief moments of release through violence. They fight with a fury born of desperation, knowing that when the battle ends, they will be returned to their isolation and torment. This makes Hellbrutes incredibly dangerous, but also unpredictable. They have been known to attack their own allies in the midst of battle, so consumed by rage and madness that they can no longer distinguish friend from foe. Unlike loyalist dreadnoughts, Hellbrutes are not honored relics to be preserved. They are manufactured in grotesque daemon forges by warpsmiths and the Dark Mechanicum. The sarcophagi used are parasitic in nature, designed to accelerate the fusion of flesh and metal, to enhance the suffering of the marine inside. This is not accidental cruelty, it is deliberate design. The more the pilot suffers, the more rage they can channel in battle, the more useful they become as weapons. The physical form of a Hellbrute reflects this corruption. Where loyalist dreadnoughts are noble and carefully maintained, Hellbrutes are twisted mockeries. Their armor plates might appear to be made of demonic flesh rather than metal. Faces might appear in the metal, screaming silently. The weapons might leak ichor or drip with warp-tainted energies. The entire machine exudes an aura of wrongness that can unsettle even hardened warriors. Older Chaos dreadnoughts, those that date back to the Horus heresy itself, sometimes retain more of their original form. These Ferrum Infernus patterns are relics from an age when the traitor legions still possessed the technology to create proper dreadnoughts. They are less overtly corrupted than Hellbrutes, but this does not make them less dangerous. The Marines inside have been conscious for 10,000 years. They have witnessed the long decline of their legions, the slow descent into madness and desperation. Some have maintained their sanity through sheer force of will, becoming tactical geniuses whose experience spans millennia. Others have become monsters, their personalities eroded by time until nothing remains but rage and the desire for oblivion. These ancient dreadnoughts are extremely rare and valuable. Each one represents a warrior who fought alongside the Primarchs, who participated in the Siege of Terror, who remembers a time before the Imperium became the stagnant tyranny it is today. They cannot be easily replaced. When one is destroyed, it represents a permanent loss to whichever warband possessed it. And then there are the Sorcerer Dreadnoughts, the rarest and most dangerous variant of all. Sorcerer Dreadnoughts, psychic power entombed. The creation of a Sorcerer Dreadnought represents one of the greatest technical and occult achievements of the traitor legions, particularly the Thousand Suns. For centuries after the Horus heresy, the problem seemed insurmountable. How do you preserve the psychic powers of a mortally wounded sorcerer when you seal them within a dreadnought sarcophagus? The difficulty is multifaceted. A psyker's connection to the warp is deeply tied to their physical brain and body. When you reduce a human being to little more than a brain and a few organs suspended in amniotic fluid, you risk severing or damaging that connection. The intense trauma of the injuries that necessitate dreadnought internment, combined with the psychological horror of being sealed in a metal tomb, could easily drive a psyker insane or burn out their powers entirely. For a regular space marine, this is merely tragic. For a sorcerer of the Thousand Suns or another psychic-focused legion, it represents the loss of their most valuable asset. The solution came from Magnus the Red himself, the Daemon Primarch of the Thousand Suns. Magnus, who had delved deeper into the mysteries of the warp than perhaps any being save the Emperor himself, developed what he called the Osiren device. This psychometric barrier lattice was designed to crown the sarcophagus, protecting the sorcerer's brain while simultaneously enhancing and focusing their psychic abilities. The technology was incredibly difficult to construct, and based on principles that even the most learned Psi-Arcanists of the Imperium could barely comprehend. The Osiran device essentially created a protected psychic resonance chamber. The sorcerer's consciousness remained fully functional and fully connected to the warp, but the barriers prevented the worst effects of corruption and madness that normally accompanied dreadnought internment. More than that, the device actually amplified the sorcerer's powers, using the dreadnought's reactor and systems to boost psychic abilities beyond what they had been capable of in their mortal flesh. The result was the Osiran Pattern Contemptor Dreadnought, a war machine that combined all the firepower and durability of a Contemptor chassis with the reality-warping abilities of a powerful sorcerer. These dreadnoughts could wield force weapons, massive blades that channeled psychic energy with devastating effect. They could cast the full range of psychic powers, from bolts of warp lightning to mind-crushing telepathic assaults. They were, in every sense, mobile psychic artillery platforms wrapped in tons of ceramite armor. Magnus, generous in his scholarly enthusiasm, shared the design of the Osiran device with other legions. The Blood Angels, with their own tradition of psychically gifted warriors, made use of it. The Grey Knights, when they were founded, incorporated similar technology into their own sacred dreadnoughts. But it was the Thousand Sons who made the most extensive use of these machines, seeing them as the perfect way to preserve their most powerful sorcerers. After the Thousand Sons turned to chaos and became embroiled in the machinations of Tzeentch, these sorcerer dreadnoughts took on an even more sinister aspect. The psychometric barriers that had once protected against madness now contained and focused corruption. The sorcerers inside were no longer merely powerful psychers. They were conduits for the raw energies of the warp, channels through which demonic entities could exert influence on reality. Their armor became covered in blasphemous runes and sigils, each one a focal point for dark rituals and forbidden sorcery. A Chaos Sorcerer dreadnought is not simply a pilot in a machine. It is a walking convergence of multiple dangerous elements. The sorcerer inside is often ancient beyond mortal comprehension, having existed since the Horus Heresy or before. They have spent thousands of years studying forbidden lore, making pacts with demons, and delving into mysteries that would shatter the minds of lesser beings. They are no longer entirely human, if they ever were. Their consciousness has been stretched and warped by millennia of exposure to chaos, until they are as much warp entity as mortal. The dreadnought chassis itself is corrupted. The metal is not simply metal anymore. It has been exposed to the warp for so long that it has taken on properties that defy physics. It might be harder than it should be, lighter than its mass suggests, or respond to the pilot's thoughts in ways that normal machinery never could. The armor is covered in runes that serve multiple purposes. They enhance the sorcerer's powers. They provide protection against enemy psychers. They bind demonic entities to the chassis, and they serve as focuses for ritual magic. And in many cases, there is a daemon bound within the machine itself. Sorcerer dreadnoughts, particularly those of Tzeentch, often have lesser warp entities imprisoned within their systems. These demons might power certain weapons, enhance the machine's speed or strength, or provide additional psychic abilities. They are bound by complex rituals and warding runes, forced into service against their will. This makes the dreadnought not just a vehicle with a pilot, but a prison containing at least two sentient entities, one mortal and one demonic, existing in a state of permanent conflict and cooperation. The weapons of a sorcerer dreadnought reflect this dual nature. A force blade, already a weapon that channels psychic energy, becomes something else entirely in the hands of a millennia-old sorcerer bound to a demon. It does not simply cut through physical matter, it slices through reality itself. It can sever souls from bodies, open rifts to the warp, or channel bolts of warp lightning that can melt through the heaviest armor. The combi weapons and heavy weapons mounted on the chassis are similarly enhanced, their ammunition often inscribed with curses or soaked in warp-tainted energies. The psychological impact of encountering a sorcerer dreadnought on the battlefield cannot be overstated. Even before it begins to fight, it radiates an aura of wrongness. Reality seems to bend around it. Shadows fall in directions that make no sense. Temperature fluctuates without reason. Those with even minor psychic sensitivity feel physically ill in its presence. And when it speaks, which it rarely does, its voice carries the weight of the warp itself, sometimes speaking in multiple voices simultaneously, as if the demon within is contributing to the conversation. In combat, a sorcerer dreadnought is a terrifying sight. It might stride forward through enemy fire, its force blade crackling with eldritch energy, while simultaneously casting psychic bolts at distant targets. It could summon warp phenomena, creating zones of unreality where the laws of physics no longer apply. It might perform ritual magic in the midst of battle, speaking words of power that cause reality to tear and demons to manifest, all while shrugging off weapons fire that would destroy normal vehicles. The Thousand Sons in particular prize their sorcerer dreadnoughts, seeing them as honored repositories of knowledge and power. When one of these ancient warriors falls in battle, it is a loss that cannot easily be replaced. The sorcerer inside possessed wisdom accumulated over thousands of years. The dreadnought chassis itself was a masterwork of forbidden technology. The rituals and bindings that held the whole thing together were unique, crafted specifically for that individual sorcerer's needs and abilities. This is what makes the prospect of orcs capturing one of these machines so particularly horrifying. They have no understanding of what they are dealing with. They do not comprehend the psychometric barriers, the warding runes, the bound demons, or the psychic resonance chambers. They see a big, tough fighting machine with lots of dakka and some spiky bits that look quite flash. And they immediately set about improving it with orc technology, utterly oblivious to the catastrophe they are about to unleash. The moment of capture, how it happens. For an orc warband to capture a chaos sorcerer dreadnought, a very specific set of circumstances must align. These war machines are rare, precious to their owners, and extraordinarily difficult to disable without destroying them entirely. Yet in the vast, chaotic galaxy of Warhammer 40,000, impossible events happen with surprising regularity, and orc ingenuity combined with sheer bloody-minded persistence can overcome obstacles that would stop more sophisticated races in their tracks. The most likely scenario for such a capture begins with a three-way battle. Orcs thrive in chaos, and nowhere is there more chaos than when multiple factions collide in the same war zone. Imagine a chaos warband assaulting an imperial world, their forces including a precious sorcerer dreadnought, an ancient relic of the Thousand Sons piloted by a sorcerer who has walked the galaxy for 10,000 years. The Imperials fight desperately, throwing everything they have at the traitors. And then the orcs arrive. Orcs are drawn to war like moths to flame. The psychic resonance of large-scale combat calls to them across the void. The wag field pulling them toward battles that promise the kind of excitement they crave. When they detect a major engagement, they do not carefully assess the tactical situation or determine which side they should support. They simply attack whoever looks like they will provide the best fight. In a three-way battle, this usually means attacking everyone. The sorcerer dreadnought, ancient and powerful, carves through Imperial lines like a scythe through wheat. Its force blade splits tanks in half. Its psychic powers tear through ranks of guardsmen, making their heads explode or driving them insane with visions of horrors beyond comprehension. Its heavy weapons reduce bunkers to rubble. For thousands of years, this warrior has fought in battles across the galaxy, and its experience shows in every movement, every shot, every swing of its massive blade. But even the most powerful warrior can be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and orcs have numbers in abundance. They crash into the chaos lines in a green tide of roaring bodies, crude guns blazing, choppers raised high. They do not fear the dreadnought. They do not understand the warp-tainted horror of what they are facing. They see only a really big enemy that is crumping a lot of other gits, which means it must be good at fighting, which means it will be fun to fight. Dozens of orcs throw themselves at the sorcerer dreadnought. The ancient warrior cuts them down with contemptuous ease, each swing of its force blade sending half a dozen greenskins flying in pieces. But there are always more. Orcs are fearless to the point of insanity, and the bigger and scarier the enemy, the more eager they are to test themselves against it. They attack from all sides, firing wildly, throwing stick bombs, and simply trying to climb onto the dreadnought to hit it with hammers. The sorcerer inside might be ancient and experienced, but even they cannot account for orc unpredictability. Orcs do not fight by conventional tactics. They do not form proper battle lines or employ sensible strategies. They simply mob the enemy with overwhelming force, trusting that sheer numbers and natural orc toughness will see them through. In this case, their instinct serves them well. The sorcerer dreadnought, engaged with multiple threats, might not notice the orc big mech moving into position with a shock attack gun, one of the most unreliable yet devastating weapons in the orc arsenal. Or perhaps a mob of tank busters has positioned themselves with their rockets, waiting for the perfect moment. Or maybe a particularly cunning orc warboss has realized that if they can damage the dreadnought's legs, it will topple and be easier to loot. The critical hit, when it comes, is almost certainly accidental. Orc weapons are not known for precision, but when you are firing thousands of rounds at a target, statistical probability eventually works in your favor. A rocket might strike the dreadnought's leg joint at exactly the wrong angle, severing critical hydraulics. A shock attack gun might malfunction in just the right way, teleporting a handful of angry snotlings directly into the dreadnought's engine compartment, where they wreak havoc on delicate systems. A lucky shot from a big shooter might penetrate a viewing slit and damage optical sensors. The sorcerer dreadnought stumbles. It tries to right itself, ancient gyroscopes compensating for the damage, but the orcs are already swarming over it. They pull at cables, hammer at armor plates, and generally tear at anything that looks like it might be important. The sorcerer inside unleashes psychic fury, casting spells that would level buildings and incinerate entire squads of normal enemies. Flames erupt from the ground. Lightning arcs between orcs. Some of the greenskins simply explode into clouds of spores as their brains are turned to mush by telepathic assault. But orcs are partially resistant to psychic attack through the sheer density of their WWA-AG field. A psychic assault that would instantly kill a human might only daze an orc, and a dazed orc is still an orc, still swinging, still fighting. The more orcs that gather around the dreadnought, the stronger their collective field becomes, providing a kind of inadvertent shielding against the worst of the sorcerer's powers. Eventually, through sheer persistence and an overwhelming expenditure of orc bodies, critical damage is achieved. Perhaps the dreadnought's power core is breached. Perhaps its targeting systems are destroyed. Perhaps the sorcerer inside, exhausted from millennia of warfare and now facing an enemy that seems immune to reason and fear, makes a mistake. The mighty war machine crashes to the ground, its systems failing, smoke pouring from ruptured seals. The orcs immediately descend on it like scavengers on a corpse. They do not kill the sorcerer inside, mostly because they do not realize there is a sorcerer inside. They see a beaten enemy vehicle that has stopped moving. In orc logic, this means it is time for looting. They tear off weapon mounts, pry open access panels, and begin the process of disassembly that precedes any serious looting operation. The sarcophagus containing the sorcerer, embedded deep within the dreadnought's chassis and protected by multiple layers of armor and warding runes, survives the initial looting. The orcs do not recognize it for what it is. They see a weird metal box covered in spiky symbols, and they decide that it probably contains something important or valuable. Rather than trying to open it on the battlefield, which would require actual work, they simply tear the entire compartment free and drag it back to their camp. Inside the sarcophagus, the sorcerer is trapped. Their consciousness remains intact, their psychic powers still potent, but they are disconnected from the dreadnought systems and unable to interact with the physical world. They are aware of being moved, of orc voices shouting in their crude language, of the jolting journey back to the orc settlement. They try to reach out psychically to either summon aid from their warband or to strike at their captors, but the warding runes that protect their mind also limit their ability to project their power outward without the dreadnought systems to amplify it. And so, a 10,000-year-old sorcerer of chaos, a warrior who has stood beside demon primarchs and witnessed the fall of entire civilizations, finds themselves being dragged through an orc camp by greenskins who are arguing about whether the shiny box would look better mounted on a truck or sold to a big mech for a bag of teeth. It is a humiliation beyond measure, and it is only the beginning of their nightmare. Initial looting. The mech boys' first examination. When the orcs drag their prize back to their settlement, it makes its way through the standard chain of orc property acquisition until it finally reaches the workshop of a mech boy. This journey itself might take days or even weeks, during which the sarcophagus containing the ancient sorcerer is kicked, dropped, used as a seat, and generally treated with all the care one might give to a particularly heavy piece of scrap metal. The workshop of an orc mech boy is a place of controlled chaos. To an outside observer, it appears to be nothing more than a massive junkyard, with piles of scavenged components, broken vehicles, and half-finished projects scattered everywhere. The air is thick with smoke from forges and the stink of promethium. Gretchens scurry about, some carrying tools, others desperately trying to avoid being stepped on by their larger cousins. The sound is constant, hammering, welding, the roar of engines being tested, and the occasional explosion when an experiment goes wrong. The big mech, who receives the dreadnought sarcophagus, is, by orc standards, something of a genius. They have an instinctive understanding of mechanical systems that borders on supernatural. This understanding comes not from study or learning, but from genetic memory encoded by the brain boys millions of years ago. The mech looks at machines and simply knows how they work, or at least how they can be made to work in an orky fashion. When the sarcophagus is brought before them, the mech's first reaction is excitement. This is clearly high-quality loot, the kind of thing that does not come along every day. The metal is strange, harder than normal ceramite, and it is covered in symbols that even the mech cannot decipher. More importantly, it is clearly from a very big, very tough fighting machine, which means it probably contains very good components. The mech begins their examination by circling the sarcophagus, studying it from all angles. They tap it with a wrench, listening to the sound it makes. They poke at the runes with a metal rod, trying to determine if they are decorative or functional. They identify various connection ports and cable housings where the sarcophagus would have interfaced with the rest of the dreadnought, and they begin to form a rough understanding of its purpose. "This here is where the pilot sits," the mech might explain to gathered orcs who have come to watch. "And all these cables, they connect the pilot to the big walkie-killy thing. And these weird spiky symbols, they're probably just for show, make it look scary-like." This assessment is, of course, catastrophically wrong. The runes are not decorative. They are warding symbols, carefully inscribed, ritual protections that contain the psychic power of the sorcerer inside and keep bound demons from escaping. But the mech has no context for understanding such things. In their experience, symbols are usually just painted on to make things look flashier. They have no concept of warp corruption, no understanding of psychic resonance, and no idea that the box they are examining contains a conscious, malevolent intelligence that is currently contemplating ways to destroy them all. Inside the sarcophagus, the sorcerer is fully aware of what is happening. They can hear the orcs, though understanding their language is difficult without access to psychic powers for translation. They can feel the vibrations, as the mechs hammer and pry at their prison. They are enraged at the indignity of their situation, but they are also calculating. They have survived for 10,000 years by being clever as well as powerful. They begin to plan. The first thing the sorcerer tries is reaching out, psychically, to any nearby chaos forces. Surely their warband is searching for them. Surely rescue is coming. But their efforts are stymied by two factors. First, the warding runes that protect their mind also limit their ability to broadcast psychic signals. Second, and more critically, the Way-Age field generated by the Orc settlement interferes with warp communications in ways the sorcerer has never encountered before. The WAG field is not like normal psychic interference. It does not block or absorb psychic energy in the way that a psychic null or a Geller field might. Instead, it warps and redirects it in unpredictable ways. When the sorcerer tries to send out a distress call, they find their psychic message bouncing around inside the WAG field like a ball in a closed room, unable to escape but also unable to dissipate. It is frustrating and deeply unsettling. This is not an experience they have ever had before. Meanwhile, the mech has moved on to the practical problem of opening the sarcophagus. There are sealed access panels and what appear to be locking mechanisms, all covered in more of those confusing symbols. The mech could try to carefully unlock these systems, following the proper procedures. But that would require patience and attention to detail, two qualities that orcs are not known for possessing. Instead, the mech takes a more direct approach. They grab the biggest power tool in their workshop, a device that might charitably be called a plasma cutter, and begin trying to cut through the sarcophagus's outer shell. The tool roars to life, sending a jet of superheated plasma against the ancient metal. The metal, forged in the demon forges of the Eye of Terror and harder than adamantium, resists the cutting beam. But the mech is persistent, and they begin to make progress, slowly burning through layers of armor. As the mech cuts, they inadvertently begin damaging the warding runes. Each rune served multiple purposes: protection for the Shetsis, sorcerer's mind; containment for psychic energy; binding for any demons associated with the machine. As the runes are cut through or burned away, these protections begin to fail. It is not a catastrophic failure, not yet, but cracks are forming in the system. The sorcerer feels the wards weakening and sees an opportunity. If they can time this correctly, if they can wait for the right moment, they might be able to break free and wreak havoc on these green-skin primitives. They begin gathering their psychic power, preparing to unleash it the moment the sarcophagus is opened. But the mech, following orc logic, does not actually open the sarcophagus in any conventional sense. Instead, having cut through what they believe is enough of the outer shell, they simply grab the whole thing and start hitting it with a hammer. Specifically, they start hitting it with a big hammer, a weapon roughly the size of a small tree that would crush a normal human flat. The impacts are tremendous, shaking the sarcophagus and rattling